Number 9. Aerial Bomb. Last year, construction workers found a World War II-era bomb in the foundation pit of a building in St. Petersburg, Russia. With an apartment complex nearby, it was important to remove the explosive as quickly and as carefully as possible. Experienced specialists from the country's Ministry of Emergency Situations reported to the site. They worked through the night, tying ropes around the bomb and delicately lifting it from the hole using a crane. It was then placed on a vehicle and driven to a military training ground where it was destroyed. It's rare to encounter such large-caliber bombs, according to a statement from the ministry. Even though it was removed by a qualified team, working with it came with a colossal risk. It's not entirely uncommon for explosives from past wars to appear decades after the conflict has ended. But sometimes, dangerous devices are deliberately left in places where they put people's safety at risk. This appeared to be the case recently when a giant white missile was found outside a police station in Ayrshire County, Scotland. Several streets were shut down for hours, blocking people from getting into their homes and businesses, while experts assessed the situation. Thankfully, they managed to remove the weapon without incident. Number 8. Pluto's Gate. The Plutonian at Hierapolis, or Pluto's Gate for short, is an ancient temple dedicated to Pluto, the Roman god of death and the ruler of the underworld. Located in modern-day Turkey, the site was rediscovered in 1965. Nobody knows exactly how old Pluto's Gate is, but it's located near the ruins of Hierapolis, which date back to 190 BC, so it's like it was built around at the same time. People used to gather at this so-called Gate to Hell and watch as animals were led into a cave to their deaths. The crowd creatures let out pained screams until they fell to the floor and went silent. This meant that Pluto's breath had killed them. Visitors weren't allowed to get too close to the entrance. Instead, they were encouraged to buy live animals and put them in an enclosed area nearby, so they could see for themselves that Pluto's breath really did kill anyone who went near it. Until relatively recently, experts didn't know how the animals died. While excavating the site, they noticed that birds sometimes fly into the cave and drop dead, courtesy of toxic carbon dioxide gas that seeps up into the cave from underground. Yikes. Only one person fits inside the cave. A staircase leads down to the area where the deadly CO2 emits from within the earth. The cave was sealed after Christianity arrived in the region and condemned the worship of Pluto. Sometime during the 6th century, an earthquake destroyed the temple, and today the site is in ruins. Archaeologists announced in 2017 that they hope to eventually open the property to visitors, albeit with some restrictions on how close they can get to the fatal cave entrance. Which is understandable, all things considered, but do you really think it's a good idea to open something called the Gate of Hell? Number 7. Naked black holes. When a star dies, it collapses in on itself, creating a region of density known as a black hole. In simple terms, the gravitational pull is so great that a black hole consumes anything and everything that comes within a certain distance of it. Once an object crosses a boundary known as an event horizon, it's gone past the point of no return. It'll never escape and will inevitably get sucked into the black hole. At the center of a black hole is a region of density called a singularity. When it comes to singularities, the laws of physics go right out the window. They're strong enough to pull things in faster than the speed of light, meaning that even light can't escape their gravity. An object would need to travel at least the speed of light to have any hope of escaping, and that simply isn't possible. Some scientists believe that the universe contains so-called naked black holes that lack an event horizon. Research published in late 2020 explains that based on the math of general relativity, this is entirely possible. A singularity without an event horizon would be even more dangerous than a standard black hole. With no clearly defined boundary, there would be no buffer zone to keep a black hole's activity separated from everything outside of it, making it much more accessible to everything around it. The concept of naked black holes seems to go against nature, but physicists haven't been able to prove that they don't exist. Even if these terrifying borderless voids truly exist, experts believe they're rare. Extreme conditions would be required for one to form. According to one theory, a typical black hole would have to spin fast enough to create a second event horizon. The two event horizons would then cancel each other out and disappear. Thankfully, no black holes are known to spin quite this fast, even if it's technically possible. And new research shows that naked singularities might be easier to identify than previously thought. If they do exist, they probably behave much differently than other black holes, and may therefore emit much brighter light. The only way to get to the bottom of the mystery is for scientists to advance their knowledge and for technology to become more sophisticated. Number 6. Aral 7. The Aral Sea was once the world's fourth largest inland sea, but it began shrinking during the 1960s due to a Soviet irrigation project that diverted the rivers that fed it. By 2010, the sea had all but disappeared. All that's left of it today are a few small lakes. Before the Aral Sea dried up, it was home to a 77 square mile island that straddled the border between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Known as Vuzrashdenia Island, it is the former site of a top-secret Soviet biological weapons testing site. Known as Aralsk 7, it was built in 1948. There were numerous highly deadly bioweapons tested here, including anthrax, smallpox, plague, brucellosis, and tularemia. Aralsk 7 was undoubtedly dangerous, but you didn't need to go there to be exposed to the deadly diseases that its staff experimented with. In 1971, the facility accidentally released weaponized smallpox into the air. 10 people were infected and 3 died. Around 50,000 nearby residents were inoculated during a mass vaccination that ensued, and the incident was kept largely hidden from the public for years to come. The site closed when the Soviet Union fell in 1991. In the following weeks, around 1,500 residents were evacuated. Today, the site remains littered with the island's abandoned structures, which are filled with containers of hazardous chemicals that were stored improperly and left behind. Some of the containers have sprung leaks, and it's extremely dangerous, potentially fatal even, for anyone to go there. At least 10 anthrax burial sites have been decontaminated as part of an ongoing cleanup effort, but more work needs to be done. Number 5. Lethal gas cloud. To the villagers living along Lake Nyos in Cameroon, August 21, 1986 seemed like any other day. That changed on a moment's notice when a deadly cloud of carbon dioxide started spewing from the lake, turning its typically blue water a deep crimson red. With no time to escape the enroaching gas, at least 1,746 people and 3,500 livestock suffocated to death. The disaster may have been caused by a natural event such as a landslide, a small earthquake, or an underwater volcanic eruption. It alerted locals and experts alike to the previously unknown hazards lurking beneath the lake and the potential for a deadly event to happen again. Scientists investigated Lake Nyos and learned that it's fed by underground springs that are capable of transporting dangerous gases to the lake bed where they accumulate, sometimes for centuries at a time before being released into the atmosphere. While researchers don't know what triggered the deadly outgassing in 1986, it's clear that it could happen again, so they made it a priority to understand the dynamics behind the disaster and hopefully stop history from repeating itself. In the meantime, a degassing system that reduces the water CO2 content was installed in Lake Nyos to prevent another tragedy. Number 4. Dragon's Hole. Blue holes are underwater caverns or sinkholes that formed during ice ages. In 2016, China announced the discovery of the world's largest blue hole in the South China Sea. Nicknamed the Dragon's Hole, and more formally known as the Yongle Blue Hole, it's located near the Paracel Islands. Locals simply refer to it as the Eye. At a depth of 987 feet, the Yongle Blue Hole vastly supersedes its runner-up, the 663-foot-deep Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. Researchers considered several factors when calculating its depth, including tidal water levels, water temperatures, salt levels, and sea water density. They plan to further explore the Yongle Blue Hole, but have acknowledged that they don't expect to find much past a certain depth because the water contains little to no oxygen and therefore can't support much life. Blue holes are popular diving attractions, but venturing into one can be extremely dangerous even for the most experienced divers. The deeper one goes, the colder the water gets. This can shock the system, and depending on the location, soft materials like sand can cave in suddenly. Deep dives also put people at risk of a condition called nitrogen narcosis, which can severely impair judgment. As a result, a diver with this condition might descend too deep without realizing that they're endangering their life. Number 3. Centralia Mine Fire. Centralia, Pennsylvania is a ghost town. As of 2017, only a handful of people lived there, but it was once a bustling coal mining town with a peak population of 1,500 residents. So, what happened? In 1962, a coal seam fire ignited in Centralia's underground mines. To this day, nobody knows what caused it exactly, but it's believed that illegal dumping may have played a role. Numerous attempts to control or extinguish the blaze failed, and the fire continued to grow. The state got involved and closed the mines for good after detecting lethal carbon monoxide levels. At first, people were unaware of the dangers that the fire posed. In fact, they continued living in Centralia for decades after the disaster started, but the effects became impossible to ignore when gas filled people's basements, their homes began to tilt, and they experienced health problems. Sinkholes appeared and smoke spewed from cracks in the road. The government brought out Centralia's residents in 1992 via eminent domain and condemned the area. 7 residents won the legal right to remain there, but everyone else left, and nobody is allowed to move there. Centralia's zip code was discontinued in 2002, and when the remaining residents pass away, their homes will become government property. Authorities have given up on extinguishing the blaze, which experts estimate could burn for at least another 250 years. Number 2. Contaminated but legal drinking water. Tap water is supposed to be safe to drink, but a new study reveals that it doesn't always live up to that standard. A clean water advocacy organization called the Environmental Working Group recently released the disturbing results of an analysis of drinking water contaminants in the US. The findings identified 56 new contaminants that appeared since the last analysis just 2 years ago. Chemicals that are known to cause a host of health problems including cancer, reproductive issues, liver disease, and more are alarmingly present throughout the country. An estimated 100 million people are affected by the presence of these substances, which include a newly identified class of toxic industrial chemicals. The list includes pesticides, radioactive materials, and disinfectant byproducts, things people would never knowingly put into their bodies. But that's not the worst news. EWG senior scientist Tasha Stoiber told The Guardian that if regulations were as strict as she believes they should be, the list would be much longer. In other words, the potentially dangerous chemicals in American tap water are not limited to the ones identified in the study. Stoiber also pointed out that regulations are established too slowly and that laws aren't keeping up with the dangerous materials that end up in drinking water. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency only started testing for a chemical called HAA9 after studies connected it to a low birth rate. Until then, HAA9 was considered safe, and who knows how many people guzzled it down, unaware of the risks associated with it. It doesn't look like the legislative process to impose new regulations will speed up anytime soon. So the most people can do is educate themselves about what's in their local water supply and buy a filter to make it as safe as possible. In the meantime, it wouldn't hurt to nudge lawmakers in the right direction by advocating for heightened safety standards. Number 1. World War II Bomb. In 2020, a strange artifact appeared on a beach in England near the seaside town of Weston-super-Mare. A Royal Navy bomb disposal team reported to the site along the Bristol Channel after receiving reports of an unidentified object in the sand. The item in question turned out to be a World War II-era anti-submarine explosive. During the war, there was a weapons research facility nearby, which could perhaps explain how it ended up on the beach. The team carefully dug around the bomb and determined that it could be live. Fearing that it could explode unpredictably in the water conditions at the time, they waited until low tide and then safely detonated the device. World War II bombs have turned up in Europe and elsewhere plenty of times, so it's unlikely that this discovery will be the last of its kind. This also raises concerns about whether anyone will ever get hurt by handling one of these devices out of curiosity, not realizing it could be dangerous, or by accidentally going near one without realizing it's there. To avoid compromising civilian safety, experts are the only people who should go near an artifact that they don't recognize. Professionals encourage the public not to touch anything that looks suspicious or that they may not recognize.
8. I-400 submarines. In August 2013, a Japanese submarine from World War II, which had been seized and deliberately sunk by US forces, was uncovered. Located off the shores of Oahu, one of the Hawaiian Islands, the large submarine had been in this location ever since it was submerged in 1946. The missing I-400, which had eluded discovery, was located by researchers from the Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory, HURL. HURL, based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Honolulu, successfully pinpointed the submarine off the southwest coast of Oahu, resting at a depth of over 2,300 feet beneath the ocean surface. This find was absolutely remarkable because the I-400 was the largest submarine in operation during World War II. Measuring in at around the size of a football field, this mega submarine was used like an underwater aircraft carrier. It would carry 3 floatplane bombers on board in a watertight hangar and would rapidly rise to the surface to deploy them before sinking back beneath the waves in order to avoid detection. It was the first submarine ever to do so, changing the game when it came to how submarines were used in warfare. With an impressive range of 37,500 miles, the colossal I-400 submarines possessed the ability to complete 1.5 circumnavigations of the globe without having to be refueled. This meant it could strike anywhere and at any time. Initially, the Japanese Navy intended to create a large amount of I-400 submarines to use in the offensive against the US. However, by the time the end of the war rolled around, they'd only been able to construct 3 of them. The I-400 was one of 5 Japanese submarines captured by the US forces. According to officials from HURL, the submarines were taken to Pearl Harbor for examination but were deliberately sunk off the coast of Oahu in 1946. The decision to scuttle the submarines was made in response to the Soviet Union's request for access to the vessels, as per their rights in the treaty signed at the end of World War II. The US Navy intentionally sank the submarines to prevent the advanced technology from falling into Soviet hands during the early days of the Cold War. 7. The tanks of Lake Hamana. The Type 4 Chi-To was a medium tank designed by the Imperial Japanese Army (IJA) during World War II. It was developed in response to the threat of American tanks that were expected to be deployed in the Pacific Theater and was intended to replace the earlier Type 97 Chi-Ha tank. However, due to various technical and logistical issues, only a few prototypes were ever produced, and the Type 4 Chi-To never saw active service. This newer tank was designed to be a heavily armored weapon. It was equipped with a 75mm Type 5 gun, which was capable of penetrating the armor of most enemy tanks of the time. The tank also featured a sloped front hull and turret, which provided additional protection against enemy fire. The Type 4 Chi-To could accommodate a crew of 5, including a commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. It was powered by a Mitsubishi 12-cylinder diesel engine, which provided a top speed of around 28 km per hour. To avoid the tanks falling into enemy hands, the 2 Chi-To tank prototypes were driven into Lake Hamana in Japan before the country surrendered and was occupied by US forces. One of the 2 tanks was recovered by the US, but the other remained at the bottom of the lake. In 2013, however, an effort was made to try and recover the last remaining tank from the bottom of Lake Hamana. But despite the best efforts of the team involved, the tank wasn't able to be brought to the surface. 6. Messerschmitt Me-262. In October 2014, workers from the Diemen Air Base Museum discovered a Messerschmitt Me-262 in a field on a farm near the city of Arnhem in the Netherlands. They were excavating the site of a bomb crater, which was often filled with various junk and debris. Normally, these bomb craters yield fascinating treasures for historians, but none of them expected to see an entire plane, let alone an Me-262. It's believed that the plane had been shot down in September of 1944 near the village of Eldon and had remained there ever since. The aircraft's pilot, Unterofficer Herbert Schauder, unfortunately was killed in the aircraft. Interestingly, at the time of the incident, the Germans removed the wreckage and hid the plane in a bomb crater in Deelen so it wouldn't be spotted. The Me-262 is remarkable because it's one of the first jet-engine fighter planes. There aren't many of these aircraft left in the world, so enthusiasts were pretty excited about the discovery. According to warbirdnews.com, the plane that was found might even be the first to come off the production line. The museum workers managed to excavate large sections of the aircraft, including the nose, one wing, the engine and two 30mm cannons, both of which were mostly intact. Since the type of aircraft was a tightly guarded secret due to the jet engine technology, it makes sense that the wreckage wouldn't have been left at the crash site. Instead, it was taken back to the airfield at Deelen, which was under Luftwaffe control at the time. There, they buried the wreckage out of sight on secure ground. 5. Graf Zeppelin. Graf Zeppelin was the only aircraft carrier ever built by Germany. Its construction started on December 28, 1936 in Kiel, but unfortunately, work was stopped in 1943 by order of Adolf Hitler. Even though the construction was over 90% complete, and the effectiveness of aircraft carriers had been demonstrated by other nations in the conflict, all large German units were withdrawn after the Battle of the Barents Sea. The carrier was then towed to Schkesecken, where any of the vessel's useful equipment was dismantled. And, in the end, the Graf Zeppelin's construction was never finished. At the beginning of 1945, with the Red Army advancing, the carrier was partially sunk and shelled by artillery. Later, in the summer of that same year, the partially repaired ship was incorporated into the USSR Navy. However, it wasn't eligible for renovation, so in 1947 it was used as a target ship and was subsequently sunk in the Baltic Sea. Back in 2006 on July 12th, the RV St. Barbara, a research vessel belonging to the Polish oil company Petro-Baltic, discovered a massive wreck that was 869 feet long. Due to the wreck's size and location, 34 miles north of Władysławowo, everyone thought it was Graf Zeppelin. The wreckage was located at a depth of over 260 feet below the surface. The Polish Navy then carried out a 2-day survey of the wreckage to confirm its identity. They used remote-controlled underwater robots, and their findings led them to be 99% certain that it was Graf Zeppelin. Although it never saw active service, Graf Zeppelin has been immortalized in collectible form through various model companies and video games. What would you do if you discovered a groundbreaking piece of World War II history? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. 4. The Musashi. The Musashi was one of the largest battleships ever built. Constructed in 1938, Musashi and her sister ship the Yamato were behemoths of the sea, measuring 862 feet long. It was sunk during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 after continued assault by US airplanes. The Musashi didn't go down without a fight though. The vessel used its massive 18-inch anti-aircraft guns to shoot the surface of the water, creating deadly geysers that the attacking planes had to avoid. For pilots who were unfortunate enough to fly into these water columns, the force they produced was compared to flying into a mountain. After taking hits from 20 torpedoes and 17 bombs, the Musashi finally met her end, sinking beneath the waves and taking the lives of 1,000 men. For decades, the location of the Musashi's wreck remained a mystery, but in 2015, a team of researchers led by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen discovered the remains of the ship off the coast of the Philippines in the Sibuyan Sea. Allen's team used advanced technology, including side-scan sonar and an autonomous underwater vessel, AUV, to locate the wreckage. The Musashi was found at a depth of about 3,280 feet below the surface. There are currently no plans to raise the Musashi from the seabed, but at least we now know the location of one of the largest battleships ever to grace the seas. 3. P-40 Kittyhawk in the desert. The P-40 Kittyhawk was a single-seat fighter aircraft that was used by the Allied forces during World War II. It was designed and produced by the American company Curtiss-Wright Corporation and was widely used by most Allied air forces throughout the war. The Kittyhawk was known for its ruggedness and durability, which made it popular among pilots, particularly in the harsh conditions of the desert theaters of war. The aircraft was powered by a single Allison V1710 engine, which gave it a top speed of around 360 miles per hour and a range of about 750 miles. In 2012, a P-40 Kittyhawk was discovered in the Sahara Desert in Egypt by a Polish survey team. The aircraft had been missing since it crashed in June 1942 during a mission to support ground troops in the Western Desert Campaign. The Kittyhawk was being piloted by Dennis Copping, who was flying in formation with another plane. The two-ship formation had departed from the landing ground at Bir el Bahira and were heading to a recovery and service unit at Wadi Natruna in Egypt. Copping's squadron was retreating from the advancing German Afrika Korps, and the pilot had to fly with the aircraft's undercarriage fixed down due to damage sustained during a hard landing the day before. On the flight, his wingman in the other plane noted accurate flak, but Copping failed to respond by radio or hand signals to correct his heading. And eventually, he flew off course and was never seen again. The discovery of the Kittyhawk was made possible through the use of high-resolution satellite imagery and advanced computer software. The team was able to identify the location of the aircraft's crash site and then traveled to the area to investigate further. The Kittyhawk was found in remarkably good condition, despite having been buried in the sand for over 70 years. The cockpit was intact and many of the plane's features were still recognizable. The propeller, however, showed the force of the impact, and it was bent and buckled from the high-speed crash. Copping's parachute was found next to the plane, with the team believing that he'd used it as a makeshift shelter to shield himself from the merciless desert sun. Bones found a small distance away seemed to indicate that although Copping survived the crash, the conditions in which he found himself dealt the final blow. 2. Austria's secret Nazi bunker. In 2014, filmmakers in Austria uncovered what they believed to be an underground bunker created by the Nazis to build and test nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. The team, led by Austrian documentary maker Andreas Sulzer, made the significant discovery near the town of St. Georgen an der Gusen. They uncovered an expansive weapons facility that Sulzer described as likely the biggest secret weapons production facility of the Third Reich. Spanning 75 acres, this industrial complex was situated in proximity to another underground factory called the B8 Bergkristall facility. It was at this facility that the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet-powered fighter, was manufactured in the final stages of World War II. Using reports from the time, as well as declassified information, Sulzer and his team were able to locate the entrance to the underground facility and dig down to the entrance which had been sealed by the Germans upon their retreat. Radiation levels in the area around the bunker were also high, helping them to not only find the bunker, but reasonably hypothesize that it had been used for nuclear weapons testing. When it comes to who would have worked in these underground weapons factories, the answer's quite unfortunate. Workers were picked from the nearby Mauthausen-Gusen concentration camp, and over 32,000 of them are presumed to have died due to the facility's conditions. Additionally, skilled workers were selected from various concentration camps throughout Europe, notably chemists, physicists, and others with the necessary skills to advance the Nazis' weapon projects. The person in charge of the nuclear facility was SS General Hans Kammler, who had also been responsible for creating the V-2 long-distance rocket used against London during the war. Kammler had also signed off on the gas chambers used in Auschwitz. Fascination still remains about Kammler, not because of his heinous history, but because of what actually happened to him after the war, something which Sulzer wants to find the answers to. The reason for this is that it's highly speculated that Kammler didn't end his own life as is claimed, but instead was secretly recruited by the US to work as part of Operation Paperclip. This operation recruited over 1,500 scientists from Nazi Germany to work on American technologies, whose knowledge and expertise they didn't want falling into Russian hands. 1. An unexpected collection. People can store some crazy things in their basements, but one thing the German authorities weren't expecting to find in an old man's basement was a World War II Panther tank. But that's exactly what happened in 2015. Alongside the tank, which was still in perfect condition, they found a large amount of ammunition. A collection of Nazi memorabilia was also discovered, including items like a bust of Hitler, mannequins dressed in Nazi uniforms, swastika pendants, lamp shaped like SS runes, and a statue created by Arno Breker, Hitler's favorite sculptor. The statue was previously positioned outside Hitler's chancellery in Berlin, and it depicts a naked warrior holding a sword in its extended hand. The collection of Nazi memorabilia was so large that it took the army 9 hours to remove it all safely. Suspicions about the tank had first been raised in 1978, when, during a heavy winter, it was used as a snowplow by the owner. But it would be decades later before his haul would finally be discovered. After a court battle, it was decided that the old man, now 84, would face a $293,000 fine. The man was then asked to donate or sell the tank and other memorabilia, which also included an anti-aircraft cannon, to a museum or collector within 2 years.
7. Ryujo. The Ryujo was a Japanese aircraft carrier in service during World War II. Commissioned in 1933, it was initially designed as a light carrier able to hold up to 8,000 tons, 7,257.478 metric tons. The aircraft underwent significant upgrades over the years, eventually increasing its displacement, allowing it to carry up to 48 aircraft. The Ryujo played a significant role in the early stages of the war in the Pacific Theater. Most famously, it participated in the invasion of the Philippines back in 1941, and was later in the Battle of Midway. During Midway, the Ryujo was part of the Japanese carrier force that was surprised by American ships and suffered heavy losses. Although it launched a strike against the American fleet, it was ultimately sunk by enemy aircraft on August 24, 1942, during the Battle of Eastern Solomons. Ryujo's design was considered incredibly innovative for its time, incorporating a flush deck design that provided more space for aircraft storage and handling. But this new design also made it more vulnerable to attack, since it lacked the armor protection other carriers had. In terms of weapons, the Ryujo was equipped with 8 12.7mm machine guns and 12 25mm anti-aircraft guns. It also had a small air group compared to other carriers, with a complement of 18 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters and 27 Aichi D-3A dive bombers. Overall, the Ryujo was a key player in the Pacific, but its vulnerability to attack ultimately led to its destruction. Nevertheless, its design innovations helped to shape the development of future aircraft carriers, and its legacy can still be seen in modern carriers flying around the world. 6. USS Missouri. The USS Missouri, BB-63, was first launched back in 1944 towards the end of World War II. She left from the New York Naval Shipyard in Brooklyn, New York, and was the last battleship commissioned by the U.S. Navy. Throughout the course of her 51-year service time, the USS Missouri honorably fought in 3 wars: World War II, the Korean War, and the Persian Gulf War. Early January 1945, the USS Missouri even sailed into the Pacific Theater. Mighty Mo, as she was called, bore witness to a lot of action, especially on the Eastern Front. She played a key role in the shore bombardment and airstrikes on Japan's mainland, along with participating in invading Okinawa as well as Iwo Jima. But despite everything she has seen, the ship's biggest and most famous role was being host to Japan's official surrender ceremony in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. After World War II, the USS Missouri later made a return for the Korean War in the Pacific. The battleship served in 2 deployments, the first one from September 1950 to March 1951, and the second from September 1952 to March 1953. The battleship helped the Marines during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir by offering fire cover, and also participated in the last days of the Battle of Incheon by delivering shore bombardment. She bombed Korea's coastline throughout the war and sailed behind aircraft carriers in their task force to give them anti-aircraft protection. In 1955, she was finally decommissioned and stayed that way for about 31 years. In 1986, though, she took part in Operation Earnest Will, guarding Kuwaiti tankers that were flying the United States' flag in the Middle East. Missouri went back to the Middle East in the 1990s to engage in the Battle of Khafji to help bombard Iraqi soldiers there in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. She then entered the Navy's ship donation program after being decommissioned for the second time in 1992. In 1998, the Missouri was finally towed to Pearl Harbor, where she now serves as a memorial to the Japanese surrender. 5. The Yamato. Built for the Imperial Japanese Navy, IJN. Right before World War II, Yamato was the head ship in her class of battleships. She and her sister ship, Musashi, were the biggest and most heavily weaponized battleships ever created, displacing close to 72 tons, 65,317.301 metric tons, at full load, and equipped with 9 18.1-inch 46cm Type 94 main cannons, the largest weapons ever installed on a warship. Yamato, which takes its name from a historical Japanese province, was created to go head-to-head with the United States, Japan's main foe in the Pacific, and its numerically superior battleship fleet. She was officially commissioned in late 1941, about a week after the assault on Pearl Harbor. She served as the combined fleet's flagship during 1942. And in June of that year, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto oversaw the Battle of Midway from her bridge, which resulted in a crushing loss for Japan. In early 1943, Musashi assumed command of the combined fleet, and Yamamoto spent the rest of the year responding to American threats. He traveled between the key Japanese naval bases at Truk and Kure. An American submarine finally sank Yamamoto in December 1943, necessitating repairs in Kure, where she would also get an upgrade with more anti-aircraft weapons and radar in early 1944. She was present at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, but did not take part in any fighting. Yamamoto was then dispatched to confront American forces occupying the Philippines during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944. And that was the only time she ever fired her main guns against enemy targets on the surface. In the Battle of Samar, they fought a light escort carrier group of Task Force 77 of the U.S. Navy, Taffy 3, and threatened to scuttle several American troop transports. After being convinced by American airstrikes that they were up against a potent U.S. carrier fleet, the Japanese decided to turn around. As a result of the significant shift in the balance of naval strength in the Pacific, Japan's fleet was severely damaged and hindered by fuel shortages in the home islands by early 1945. In an effort to stop the Allied advance, Yamamoto was sent on a one-way mission to Okinawa in April 1945. She was instructed to beach herself and defend the island until she was ultimately destroyed. It was basically a suicide mission. U.S. submarines and planes found the task force south of Kyushu, and on April 7, 1945, American carrier-based bombers sank her, causing the death of the majority of her crew. Ever since they were built, Yamamoto and her sister Musashi have had a major influence on Japanese culture. Due to their size, speed, and strength, the battleships epitomized Imperial Japanese naval engineering and clearly demonstrated Japan's readiness to protect its interests against Western powers, particularly the United States. Some Japanese people believed that their nation could never fall as long as the Yamamoto could put up a fight because of the ship's symbolic power. What's your favorite battleship? Let us know in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. 4. USS Constitution. The USS Constitution is a legendary U.S. Navy warship. Commissioned in 1797, it played a significant role in defending American interests during the War of 1812. Designed by Joshua Humphreys, the Constitution was a frigate ship that was only about 204 feet, 62 meters long, and 44 feet, 13 meters wide. The ship's hull was made out of dense, strong oak and cedar wood, earning it the nickname Old Ironsides, since British cannonballs bounced right off its sides during a battle with HMS Guerrière on August 19, 1812, at the start of the war. During her time, the USS Constitution seized multiple ships. On top of that, she fought and defeated 5 British warships: Java, Pictou, Caen and Levant, and the aforementioned HMS Guerrière. She operated mainly in the Mediterranean after the War of 1812 and helped secure the HN Gambrill and other slave ships off the coast of Africa. She retired from active duty in 1881, but not before serving for the U.S. Naval Academy as a training ship in the Civil War. During retirement, the ship served as a home for servicemen at the Kittery, Maine-based Portsmouth Navy Shipyard until 1907, when she was then given museum ship status. She finished a 90-port tour of the United States back in 1931. On August 19, 2012, the 200th anniversary of her conflict with the HMS Guerrière, she lifted her sails once again. The USS Constitution, which is still a fully operational naval vessel, still makes a few voyages into Boston Harbor each year, usually around the 4th of July. This allows the ship to be turned around so it receives an equal amount of exposure to the weather while moored throughout the rest of the year. 3. The Bismarck. German battleship Bismarck, which served in World War II, had a brief but remarkable career. The Bismarck was a German battleship built during World War II and launched in 1939. It was considered one of the most powerful ships of its time, with a top speed of 30 knots and a main battery of 8 15-inch, 38.1 centimeter guns. The ship's design was supposed to provide Germany with a naval force capable of challenging the British Royal Navy, which was the dominant naval power in the world back then. The Bismarck saw action in the Atlantic during the start of the war, and in May 1941, it engaged in a famous battle with the British HMS Hood, after being seen near Bergen, Norway. The Royal Navy kept a watchful eye on the Bismarck's development. Britain largely relies on their commercial ships to transport food, munitions, and weaponry, so it was a major fear that Britain could be forced to surrender if a strong and re-energized German Navy could routinely destroy supply ships. The main ammo magazine of the Hood was pierced by a shell only a few minutes into the fire exchange. Only 3 of the 1,400 crew members on board the Hood survived the resulting explosion. The Bismarck managed to sink the Hood, but in the process, it sustained significant damage from enemy fire. The Hood sinking had a significant impact on both sides' propaganda. Germany could brag about sinking the former most powerful ship in the world. There was a sense and need for vengeance in Britain. The Bismarck needed to be destroyed. Despite the Bismarck's powerful armament and speed, it was ultimately taken down by British forces on May 27, 1941, after being hit by torpedoes. Just 110 of the Bismarck's 2,300 crew members made it out alive. The Bismarck's loss was a significant blow to the German naval effort during World War II, and it highlighted the dominance of the British Royal Navy. The wreck was discovered in 1989 by an expedition under the direction of American oceanographer Robert Ballard. At a depth of over 15,000 feet, 4,572 meters, the battleship was found upright. 2. USS Nevada. The USS Nevada was a magnificent battleship that saw action in both world wars and during some of history's most critical periods. She was the first of her kind to be launched in 1914, and she innovated several improvements such as triple gun turrets, oil fuel, geared turbines, and all-or-nothing armor that would one day inspire modern U.S. battleships. She carried convoys to Europe and patrolled the Atlantic during World War I. Also, she played a role in the Allied invasion of Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution. She had a significant overhaul after the war that increased her speed, weaponry, and defense. The USS Nevada was stationed at Pearl Harbor during World War II on December 7, 1941, when the Japanese launched their attack. She was the only battleship to move during the assault, but she caught on fire after being struck by countless bombs and torpedoes. The vessel was deliberately beached to prevent obscuring the harbor's entry. After significant repairs, she was put back into service and allowed to join the Allied invasion of Normandy on D-Day, when she blasted German positions with her guns. She also helped with landings in Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and southern France. In 1946, the first atomic bomb test at Bikini Atoll was conducted with her as the intended target. She was severely damaged but survived the explosion. She continued to resist sinking even after being deployed for another nuclear test just 1 month later. In 1948, she was finally sunk in the Pacific Ocean by naval gunfire and torpedoes. 1. USS Washington. The USS Washington, BB-56, was a North Carolina-class battleship that served during World War II. She was the second and final ship of her class and the first battleship built for the U.S. Navy since 1923. She was officially named after the state of Washington and was fully commissioned in May 1941. Washington's first assignment was to reinforce the British home fleet in March 1942. She escorted convoys to the Soviet Union and took part in exercises with the Royal Navy. She was briefly the flagship of Task Force 39, but lost her commander, Rear Admiral John W. Wilcox, who drowned in a storm. She returned to the U.S. for an overhaul in July 1942 before joining the Pacific Fleet in September. Washington's most notable role was at the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal on November 14 to 15, 1942, where she engaged and sank the Japanese battleship Kirishima and a destroyer while avoiding taking on any damage herself. She was the only U.S. battleship to sink an enemy battleship in a one-on-one duel during the whole war. She also prevented the Japanese from bombarding U.S. Marine positions on Guadalcanal and helped secure a strategic victory for the Allied forces. After Guadalcanal, Washington mainly served as an escort, providing anti-aircraft and anti-submarine protection. She also occasionally bombarded Japanese shore targets to support amphibious landings. The ship also took part in major campaigns like those in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, the Marianas and Palau, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Washington was eventually decommissioned in June 1947 and held in reserve. She was taken off the Naval Vessel Register in June 1960 and was then sold for scrap. She earned 13 battle stars for her service in World War II, leaving her mark in the history books. Thanks for watching. Which of these ships impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon. Bye.